Between January and June 1944, French resistance networks conducted over 950 railway sabotage operations across occupied France. These attacks destroyed 486 locomotives, derailed hundreds of freight cars, and delayed German troop movements by an average of 48 to 72 hours during the critical weeks following D-Day. German reprisals killed an estimated 3,000 resistance members and their families. But the sabotage succeeded because French civilians, bakers, teachers, farmers, railway workers, transformed everyday materials into timing devices that German security couldn't detect. This is the story of how one baker used yeast fermentation to build explosive timers that stopped German reinforcements from reaching Normandy beaches. The glass container was expanding. Marcel Rousseau watched the rubber membrane stretch as gas pressure built inside the sealed vessel. Yeast fermentation produced carbon dioxide at predictable rate when temperature and sugar concentration were controlled precisely. The pressure would eventually rupture the membrane, triggering mechanical switch that completed electrical circuit, detonating explosive charge attached to railway track 3 kilometers from his bakery. The mathematics were straightforward. Current pressure indicated 8 hours until rupture. 8 hours was sufficient time to place device at target location and return safely before detonation. 3 hours remained until German patrol conducted routine inspection of commercial premises along the railway corridor. The patrol visited Marcel's bakery every Tuesday and Friday, checking inventory records, examining storage areas, questioning staff about unusual activities. Today was Friday. Marcel needed the timing device concealed before patrol arrived. The device components, glass container, rubber membrane, chemical compounds, electrical connections, were currently spread across his basement workbench. Assembling them into single portable package required 40 minutes of careful work. Cleaning workspace and removing evidence of chemical processing required additional 20 minutes. Marcel had time, but no margin for error. The bakery basement smelled of flour, yeast, and something sharper that didn't belong in commercial bakery. The sharp smell came from potassium chlorate, an oxidizing agent that Marcel had acquired through his family's flour milling business by claiming it was needed for bleaching flour. German authorities permitted French businesses to purchase certain chemicals for legitimate commercial purposes. Potassium chlorate appeared on permitted list because it had industrial applications, but when mixed with sugar and confined in pressure vessel, it became component in timing mechanism for delayed action explosive device. Marcel was 47 years old, owner of 3-generation family bakery in small town near Chartres, 70 kilometers southwest of Paris. The town occupied strategic position along main railway line connecting Paris to western France. German military trains passed through daily, carrying troops, equipment, ammunition, and supplies toward Atlantic Wall fortifications and occupation garrisons throughout Brittany and Normandy. The railway junction was critical infrastructure for German military logistics. Disrupting it would force German command to reroute trains, adding days to travel times, reducing their ability to respond quickly to Allied invasion when it came. Marcel had joined local resistance network in 1942 after Germans requisitioned his bakery's production for military use. The requisition meant Marcel baked bread for German soldiers, while French civilians went hungry. The injustice was personal and immediate. When resistance organizers approached him about using bakery as cover for covert activities, Marcel agreed without hesitation. His commercial premises provided legitimate reason for receiving deliveries of flour, sugar, yeast, and other materials that could be diverted to resistance purposes. His basement provided secure workspace where timing devices could be assembled without observation. His son Philippe had worked as apprentice baker, learning the trade that had sustained Rousseau family for 3 generations. Philippe was 22 years old engaged to local teacher's daughter, planning to take over bakery when Marcel retired. 5 weeks ago, Gestapo arrested Philippe during sweep of suspected resistance members. The arrest followed German discovery of sabotaged railway switch that had derailed military supply train. Gestapo interrogated dozens of people who lived near the railway, looking for evidence of resistance activity. Philippe was arrested not because Gestapo had specific evidence against him, but because he was young, physically capable, and lived in family with commercial premises near railway. Gestapo logic was straightforward: arrest everyone suspicious, interrogate them harshly, release those who couldn't possibly be involved, hold those who might be useful for gaining intelligence about resistance networks. Marcel's wife, Isabelle, had begged him to stop resistance work after Philippe's arrest. She argued that continuing increased risk to entire family. If Germans discovered Marcel was building timing devices, they wouldn't just execute Marcel. They would execute Isabelle, Philippe, and probably extended family members as collective punishment. German reprisal policy was explicit. Resistance activity by one family member justified punishment of entire family. The policy was designed to discourage resistance by making consequences extend beyond individual perpetrators to everyone they loved. Philippe's apprentice apron still hung on hook near bakery oven. Marcel saw it every morning when he started bread production. The apron was stained with flour, bore scorch marks from working too close to hot oven, showed wear patterns from 3 years of daily use. Seeing the apron reminded Marcel of promise he had made to Philippe when boy started apprenticeship at age 19. Promise that Rousseau family would continue baking tradition, that bakery would remain in family, that Philippe would inherit business that sustained 3 generations. Continuing resistance work contradicted that promise by risking everything Philippe would inherit. But stopping resistance work meant accepting German occupation without opposition. It meant allowing military trains to pass through town unimpeded. It meant contributing to German military capability through requisitioned bread production without doing anything to counterbalance that forced contribution. Marcel couldn't reconcile stopping resistance work with his understanding of what honor required. The calculation wasn't simple arithmetic of family safety versus resistance activity. It was a more complex question about what kind of man could live with himself after choosing safety over duty when others were fighting and dying to liberate France. Marcel's hands were covered with fine coating of flour and chemical residue. The flour came from commercial baking work. He had spent morning producing requisitioned bread for German garrison. The chemical residue came from resistance work, mixing compounds, preparing timing device, testing pressure calculations. His hands literally combined the 2 aspects of his current life: legitimate commercial activity that supported German occupation and covert resistance activity that opposed it. The contradiction was physically present on his skin, impossible to ignore, impossible to resolve except by choosing one identity over the other. 6 weeks ago, another baker in nearby village had been caught with explosive components during German search of his premises. The baker's name was Jacques Mercier. He had been part of same resistance network, had been building similar timing devices using fermentation chemistry. Gestapo conducted surprise inspection of Jacques' bakery, discovered glass containers with suspicious chemical residues, arrested Jacques and his entire family. Military tribunal convicted Jacques of sabotage, sentenced him and his wife and 2 children to death. Execution was carried out 3 days after conviction. German soldiers posted execution notice on village square, listing names and crime. Jacques Mercier, baker, age 44. Marie Mercier, age 41. Jean Mercier, age 17. Sophie Mercier, age 14. Convicted of sabotage against Reich military operations, executed by firing squad. Marcel had seen the execution notice when he traveled to nearby village for flour delivery. Reading the names, especially the children's names, had created physical reaction. He had vomited in alley behind village church, overcome by horror of collective punishment. Jean was same age as Philippe. Sophie was younger than Philippe's fiancée. Neither child had been involved in resistance work. They died because their father chose resistance over family safety. The notice served as warning to other resistance members. German message was clear. Resistance activity doesn't just endanger you personally, it endangers everyone connected to you. Jacques' timing device had failed. Post-execution investigation by Resistance Network determined that Jacques had miscalculated fermentation rate, causing pressure vessel to rupture prematurely while he was transporting it to target location. The premature detonation destroyed device without damaging railway, alerted German security to presence of sabotage attempt, and prompted intensive search that discovered Jacques' workshop. The failure was technical. Jacques hadn't accounted for temperature variation during transport, but consequences were catastrophic for his entire family. Marcel had reviewed Jacques' calculations after learning about the failure. The error was subtle but fatal. Jacques had calibrated timing based on controlled basement temperature, but hadn't considered that carrying device outdoors in June heat would accelerate fermentation rate. The correction was simple. Add insulation to slow temperature change during transport, or reduce initial sugar concentration to compensate for anticipated temperature increase. Marcel had incorporated both corrections into his current device design, but he couldn't be certain his calculations were perfect. Chemical timing involved too many variables for absolute certainty. Temperature, humidity, yeast strain variation, sugar purity, container leakage. Any of these could affect actual timing differently than predicted. The choice facing Marcel now was whether to activate this timing device or destroy it. Activating device meant accepting risk of malfunction, similar to Jacques' failure. Malfunction could expose Marcel to discovery, leading to his execution and likely execution of Isabelle and Philippe. The risk wasn't hypothetical. Jacques' failure proved that technical errors occurred despite careful calculations. Marcel's confidence in his corrections didn't eliminate possibility of unforeseen variable causing similar failure. Destroying device meant eliminating risk to family, but abandoning mission that was critically important for D-Day operations. Marcel had received coded message through Resistance Communication Network 3 days ago. Message indicated major Allied operation was imminent, probably within next week. Resistance networks across France were ordered to execute Plan Vert, coordinated sabotage of railway system to prevent German reinforcements from reaching invasion beaches. The timing was critical. If sabotage occurred too early, Germans would have time to repair damage before invasion. If it occurred too late, German reinforcements would already be moving. The sabotage needed to happen in narrow window immediately before and during invasion. Marcel's timing device was part of larger coordinated attack involving 47 resistance members across 3 villages. Each member had specific target: railway switches, signals, locomotives, fuel depots, communication lines. The attacks were scheduled to begin simultaneously at dawn tomorrow, overwhelming German security's ability to respond to multiple incidents. If Marcel destroyed his device, his target wouldn't be sabotaged, creating gap in attack plan that might reduce overall effectiveness. German trains might find alternative route through that gap, allowing reinforcements to reach invasion zone faster. 47 people depended on coordination of this attack. If Marcel withdrew, others might lose confidence, might question whether attack was still viable. Resistance work required trust that everyone would fulfill their assigned role. Doubt about one member's commitment could cascade into broader failure as others reconsidered their own involvement. Marcel's decision affected not just his target, but entire network's confidence. The yeast fermentation was producing steady stream of carbon dioxide bubbles in sugar solution. Marcel watched them rise through liquid, accumulate under rubber membrane, gradually inflate the membrane like tiny balloon. The process was beautiful in its simplicity. Biological activity producing mechanical pressure that would eventually trigger electrical switch. No complex machinery required, no precision engineering, just yeast consuming sugar, producing gas, building pressure until membrane couldn't contain it anymore. The same biological process that made bread rise was being used to trigger explosive device. German Railway Security Command was learning to recognize resistance sabotage patterns. Hauptmann Klaus Weber, responsible for protecting railway infrastructure in Chartres region, had inspected over 200 sabotage sites during past year. He had learned that resistance members often worked from commercial premises near railways, businesses that provided cover for surveillance and access to materials. He had ordered increased inspections of bakeries, mills, and warehouses within 1 kilometer of railway lines. These businesses were visited twice weekly, records examined, staff questioned about any unusual activities or material acquisitions. Weber was methodical investigator. He documented every inspection, compared records over time, looked for subtle changes that might indicate covert activity. Increased flour purchases might indicate legitimate business growth or might indicate diversion of materials to resistance use. Unexplained electrical consumption might indicate new equipment or might indicate operation of clandestine radio transmitter. Unusual chemical purchases might have innocent commercial explanation or might indicate bomb-making materials. Weber's approach was systematic pattern recognition, identifying anomalies that warranted deeper investigation. Marcel's bakery had been flagged in Weber's records 3 months ago because electrical consumption had increased without corresponding increase in bread production. Marcel had explained increase as result of installing new refrigeration equipment, which was technically true. He had installed refrigerator. What he hadn't mentioned was that refrigerator was used primarily for controlling temperature of chemical reactions in basement, not for food storage. Weber had accepted explanation, but noted in records that this bakery warranted continued monitoring. The timing device was nearly complete. Marcel had assembled pressure vessel, installed electrical switch, connected detonator. Only remaining task was adding sugar solution to initiate yeast fermentation. Once solution was added, fermentation would begin immediately. Device would become active, pressure would start building, timer would be running. There would be no way to stop process except by destroying device. Marcel would have committed to attack once solution was added. He measured sugar concentration carefully, using scales calibrated for bakery recipes. The precision required for timing device was similar to precision required for bread making. Too much sugar and fermentation rate increased, shortening timer. Too little sugar and fermentation slowed, lengthening timer. Marcel had calculated that 40 grams of sugar per 100 milliliters of water at 20 degrees Celsius would produce 8-hour timing with plus or minus 30-minute accuracy. The calculation was based on known fermentation rates for bakery yeast strain he used regularly. He added sugar solution to pressure vessel, sealed rubber membrane, watched initial bubbles form. The fermentation had begun. Device was active. Timer was running. 8 hours from now, plus or minus 30 minutes, membrane would rupture, switch would close, electrical current would flow to detonator, explosive charge would detonate underneath railway track, derailing whatever train happened to be passing. If calculations were correct and device functioned as designed, German military supply train would be destroyed. If calculations were wrong or device malfunctioned, consequences were unpredictable and potentially catastrophic for Marcel and everyone connected to him. Marcel packed device carefully into wooden crate lined with insulation. The insulation would slow temperature changes during transport, improving timing accuracy. He labeled crate as containing flour shipment for mill in next village, creating plausible cover for transporting it. Resistance courier would collect crate within hour, transport it to predetermined location near railway, conceal it in undergrowth where railway curved sharply. The curve forced trains to slow, maximizing derailment effectiveness. Device would be positioned and armed by nightfall, ready for dawn detonation. The basement cleanup took 25 minutes. Marcel washed workbench with vinegar solution to neutralize chemical residues, disposed of contaminated rags by burning them in bakery oven, along with regular waste, ventilated basement to eliminate unusual odors. When cleanup was complete, basement appeared like normal commercial bakery storage area. Flour sacks, sugar containers, yeast supplies, baking equipment. Nothing suggested timing device had been assembled here hours earlier. German patrol arrived at 14:10 hours, 15 minutes earlier than typical schedule. Hauptmann Weber conducted inspection personally, accompanied by 2 enlisted soldiers. Weber examined inventory records, compared current stock levels against previous week's records, questioned Marcel about unusual purchases or deliveries. Marcel provided routine answers, maintaining calm demeanor despite awareness that active explosive timing device was currently sitting in wooden crate marked for courier pickup. Weber noticed crate marked for mill delivery. He asked about contents. Marcel explained it contained flour being returned to mill because quality didn't meet bakery standards, plausible explanation that happened occasionally in legitimate commercial operations. Weber asked to inspect crate contents. Marcel opened crate, showed flour bags arranged on top. The explosive device was underneath, concealed by flour bags and insulation. Weber examined visible flour bags, didn't request full unpacking of crate. He appeared satisfied with explanation, moved to inspect other areas of bakery. Inspection lasted 30 minutes. Weber found nothing suspicious. He signed inspection log, indicated next inspection would occur Monday morning. After patrol departed, Marcel remained motionless for 5 minutes, ensuring no one returned unexpectedly. Then he allowed himself brief moment of relief. Device had survived inspection. Courier would collect crate within hour. Mission would proceed as planned. Resistance courier collected crate at 1520 hours, transported it by bicycle to predetermined location, concealed it in undergrowth near railway curve, activated timer by adjusting position of electrical contacts. Device was now armed and counting down. 8 hours remained until detonation. The courier returned, reported successful placement, confirmed device location matched targeting plan. Marcel's portion of coordinated attack was complete. 46 other resistance members across 3 villages were completing similar placements. By nightfall, multiple timing devices would be positioned along railway corridor, ready for dawn detonations. Marcel spent evening conducting normal bakery operations, preparing bread for next morning's German garrison delivery. The routine work provided psychological relief from tension of device placement. Kneading dough, shaping loaves, monitoring oven temperatures were familiar activities that required attention, but not intense concentration. He could perform these tasks automatically while processing emotions about what would happen at dawn. Isabel knew Marcel was involved in resistance work, but didn't know specific details. She had made clear she didn't want to know details because knowing increased her risk during interrogation if arrested. If she genuinely knew nothing about specific operations, Gestapo couldn't extract information from her regardless of interrogation methods. This strategic ignorance protected her and provided Marcel with some measure of relief. Whatever happened to him, Isabel could truthfully claim she knew nothing about timing devices or sabotage operations. But Isabel wasn't foolish. She understood that Marcel's basement work involved resistance activity. She recognized when he was particularly tense, which correlated with periods before and after sabotage operations. She had seen execution notices posted in village squares. She understood risks Marcel was taking. Her decision to stay with him despite those risks was active choice, not passive ignorance. She couldn't stop him from resistance work, but she could choose to remain partner despite disagreement about whether risks were justified. The timing devices detonated at dawn across 47 locations simultaneously. Marcel heard multiple explosions in distance, felt buildings shake from closest detonation 3 kilometers away. Railway traffic stopped immediately as German security assessed damage and began emergency repairs. Military supply trains scheduled to pass through Chartres region were halted, rerouted, delayed. The coordinated sabotage had succeeded in disrupting railway operations across wide area. German response was swift and brutal. Wehrmacht security forces conducted mass arrests in villages near sabotage sites, detained hundreds of suspected resistance members, executed 37 people within a week as collective punishment. Marcel was arrested 3 days after sabotage, along with 18 other residents from his village. Gestapo interrogation focused on attempting to identify bomb makers, timing device designers, network coordinators. Marcel maintained he was simple baker, knew nothing about explosives or timing devices, had no involvement in resistance activity. Interrogation lasted 6 days. Marcel was beaten, deprived of sleep, subjected to mock execution. Gestapo interrogators tried to force confession by showing execution orders for Isabelle and Philippe, claiming both would die unless Marcel confessed and identified other network members. Marcel understood these threats were tactical. Gestapo wanted confessions and intelligence, would execute family members only if they determined execution would produce intelligence benefits. As long as Marcel provided nothing useful, there was small chance Gestapo might release him as having no value. Allied invasion began on June 6, 1944. D-Day. German reinforcements attempted to move toward Normandy beaches, but encountered damaged railway infrastructure across multiple routes. Repairs were incomplete. Alternative routes were congested. German units that should have reached invasion zone within 24 hours took 72 hours or longer. The delay gave Allied forces crucial time to establish beachheads, bring in additional troops and equipment, consolidate positions. The railway sabotage hadn't stopped German reinforcements entirely, but had delayed them enough that tactical situation was significantly different when they finally arrived. Marcel was released from German custody on June 14, 1944, 8 days after D-Day. Gestapo had apparently determined he had no useful intelligence value, wasn't worth continued detention resources. He returned home to find Isabelle and Philippe had survived without arrest. Philippe had been released from previous detention during chaos following invasion. The family was intact, damaged by experience but alive. Marcel never told Isabelle that yeast fermentation timing device he built had detonated successfully, derailing German ammunition train, destroying 37 freight cars full of artillery shells and small arms ammunition. The explosion had been massive, spectacular, and completely effective. German forces lost significant ammunition supplies, disrupting their ability to reinforce Normandy defenses. The single device Marcel built had measurable impact on German military capability during critical period. But impact came with cost measured in human lives. 37 resistance members executed in reprisals, 18 families destroyed, hundreds arrested and interrogated, villages traumatized by German security operations. The mathematics of resistance were grim. Effective sabotage produced effective reprisals. Success and suffering were inseparably linked. Marcel's successful timing device contributed to Allied victory, but also contributed to deaths of people he knew, including families from his own village. Post-war accounting of railway sabotage during D-Day period concluded that French resistance operations destroyed or damaged 486 locomotives, derailed hundreds of freight trains, and delayed German troop movements by average of 48 to 72 hours. These delays contributed significantly to Allied success in establishing Normandy beachhead. Military historians estimate that without railway sabotage, German reinforcements would have arrived 2 to 3 days earlier, potentially preventing Allied breakout from beaches or forcing much higher casualty rates during initial landing phase. The strategic value of sabotage justified resistance efforts from military perspective. But from personal perspective of people who conducted sabotage and suffered reprisals, justification was more complex. Marcel believed sabotage was necessary, worth the risks, justified by ultimate goal of French liberation. But he also carried permanent psychological burden of knowing his actions contributed to executions of neighbors and friends. Victory and guilt coexisted, neither canceling the other. Jacques Mercier's failed timing device became cautionary lesson for resistance networks. Technical training improved. Resistance engineers shared information about common failure modes, developed more reliable designs, created testing protocols. The yeast fermentation timing method was refined based on Jacques' experience: better insulation, more conservative sugar concentrations, redundant safety mechanisms. Subsequent devices had higher success rates and lower premature failure rates. Jacques' family died, but their deaths contributed to improvements that saved others. Marcel continued operating bakery after liberation. Allied forces drove Germans from France by autumn 1944. Marcel resumed normal commercial baking, no longer required to produce requisitioned bread for occupation forces. Philippe returned to apprenticeship, eventually took over bakery as planned. Rousseau family baking tradition continued. Marcel rarely discussed resistance work publicly. He considered it private matter, not suitable for public commemoration. When local officials proposed resistance memorial in town square, Marcel contributed money but declined to have his name listed. He argued that executed resistance members deserved recognition, survivors did not. Memorial was built listing names of 37 executed people from regional resistance network, including Jacques Mercier and his family. The memorial inscription reads, "In memory of resistance members executed by German occupation forces during liberation of France, 1944. They gave their lives so France could be free." Marcel's name doesn't appear because he survived. Jacques' name appears because he and his family were executed after his timing device failed prematurely. The memorial thus records outcome rather than effort, death rather than resistance. Many who resisted aren't listed. Only those who died are remembered publicly. Marcel kept one item from his resistance work: calculation notebook showing fermentation rate tables and timing formulas. The notebook documented technical knowledge he developed through experimentation. After war, he donated notebook to French Resistance Museum in Paris. Museum curators examined notebook, recognized it as rare example of documented improvised explosive timer design. Most resistance technical knowledge was transmitted orally, destroyed for security, or lost when makers were killed. Marcel's notebook survived because he survived and chose to preserve it. Museum exhibition about resistance sabotage includes Marcel's notebook alongside other improvised weapons and devices. Exhibition text explains that resistance members adapted everyday materials, baking supplies, farming chemicals, commercial equipment, to create weapons for fighting occupation. The yeast fermentation timer exemplified this adaptation. Biological process used for centuries to make bread was repurposed to trigger explosives that disrupted German military logistics. Modern visitors examining Marcel's notebook often have difficulty understanding technical details. Fermentation rate calculations require chemistry knowledge. Timing precision requirements reflect reality that premature detonation exposed resistance members to capture. Redundancy considerations show awareness that failure meant death. The notebook isn't just technical reference, it's documentation of life and death engineering, where mistakes killed entire families. The German railway security files captured after liberation included Hauptmann Weber's inspection records for Marcel's bakery. Weber had noted electrical consumption anomaly, conducted twice-weekly inspections, remained suspicious of possible covert activity. But he never found evidence sufficient for arrest. Marcel's operational security, careful cleanup, plausible commercial covers, limited visible activity, had been adequate to avoid detection despite being under active suspicion. The margin between success and discovery was narrow but sufficient. Weber survived war, was interrogated by Allied intelligence about German counterinsurgency operations, provided testimony about resistance networks he investigated. His testimony confirmed that German security recognized bakeries near railways as high-probability locations for resistance activity, but lacked resources for constant surveillance. German approach was periodic inspection combined with harsh reprisals when sabotage was discovered. The strategy accepted that some sabotage would succeed, but attempted to deter future activity through collective punishment. Post-war analysis concluded German reprisal strategy failed because French population considered liberation worth the sacrifice. Reprisals didn't deter resistance. They reinforced determination to drive out occupation forces. Executions of resistance members became martyrdoms that strengthened rather than weakened resistance networks. The strategic calculation that harsh punishment would suppress resistance was incorrect because it misunderstood French motivations. Marcel's yeast fermentation timing device represented intersection of necessity and ingenuity. Resistance members needed delayed action explosives but lacked access to commercial timing mechanisms. They had access to baking supplies and basic chemistry knowledge. They adapted available materials to meet operational requirements. The solution wasn't sophisticated by engineering standards. It was crude, unreliable, dangerous to handle. But it was sufficient for purpose when deployed carefully by people who understood limitations. The technical simplicity was strategic advantage. German security looking for sophisticated explosive devices overlooked simple biological timer that looked like baking supplies until final assembly. The simplicity also created accessibility. Many people knew fermentation chemistry from baking experience, could build timers without specialized training. Distribution of capability across many operators made resistance harder to suppress than if explosive expertise was concentrated in few specialists. Marcel Rousseau never publicly discussed how she felt about Marcel's resistance work endangering family. In private conversations with friends years after war, she acknowledged being terrified throughout occupation, especially after Philippe's arrest. She said she understood why Marcel felt compelled to resist, but wished he had chosen family safety over resistance duty. She said she forgave him for risks he took, but never forgot fear she experienced. Her perspective represented many resistance families, proud of what was accomplished, traumatized by what was risked, unable to fully reconcile pride and trauma. Philippe Rousseau married his fiancée after liberation, had 3 children, operated family bakery until retirement. He maintained his father's tradition of not discussing resistance work publicly. When historians interviewed him about Marcel's activities, Philippe said only, "My father did what he believed necessary. Many did same. We survived. Others did not. We remember those who did not." The simple statement captured complexity of resistance experience. Pride in what was accomplished. Humility about survival being partially luck. Obligation to remember those who didn't survive. Philippe's reluctance to elaborate reflected broader pattern among resistance survivors. Unwillingness to claim special credit for actions that many performed. Awareness that outcome could easily have been different. desire to honor dead rather than celebrate survival. Marcel Rousseau died in 1978 at age 81. His obituary mentioned he had been baker, operated family business for 50 years, survived German occupation. It didn't mention resistance work or timing devices or railway sabotage. The obituary reflected Marcel's preference for privacy about wartime activities. He considered resistance work obligation, not achievement deserving public recognition. But French Resistance Museum preserves Marcel's calculation notebook as historical artifact demonstrating improvised explosive timer design. Museum interpretation acknowledges that this specific notebook represents knowledge that probably dozens of resistance members possessed and applied. Marcel's notebook survived to document what others did without documentation. The preservation thus honors not just Marcel, but all resistance members who adapted commercial chemistry knowledge for military purposes. The yeast fermentation timing method was used across France during 1944 sabotage campaign. Exact number of devices built is unknown. Resistant security minimized documentation. Many records were destroyed. Survivors rarely discussed details. Post-war estimates suggest hundreds of similar devices were constructed by resistance networks. Some succeeded. Some failed. Some were discovered before use. The method was one among many improvised approaches to building delayed action explosives under conditions where commercial timing mechanisms were unavailable. Railway sabotage campaigns succeeded despite improvised nature of equipment because resistance members accepted high risk of failure and death. They weren't professional military engineers with sophisticated tools. They were civilians adapting household knowledge to military purposes. Success rate was lower than professional military operations would achieve. But resistance conducted enough operations that even low success rate produced significant cumulative impact. 486 locomotives destroyed represented more sabotage than German security could prevent, despite harsh countermeasures. Marcel's story represents thousands of similar stories from occupied France. Ordinary people conducting extraordinary resistance, using whatever materials and knowledge they possessed. His specific contribution was developing reliable yeast fermentation timing method and documenting calculations that helped others implement similar designs. His broader contribution was demonstrating that effective resistance didn't require sophisticated resources, only determination and willingness to accept consequences. The glass container expanding from yeast fermentation pressure was simple device. The chemistry was basic. The engineering was crude. But when placed correctly at correct time, it derailed German ammunition train, destroyed supplies needed for defending against Allied invasion, contributed marginally but measurably to liberation of France. Simple device, significant impact. Built in bakery basement, hidden in plain sight, working until it completed its purpose. That purpose cost 37 lives in German reprisals. The cost was horrific. But French resistance considered liberation worth the price. Marcel considered his contribution justified despite personal anguish about neighbors who died in reprisals. The calculation wasn't simple mathematics of lives saved versus lives lost. It was more complex assessment of whether freedom was worth fighting for, even when fighting meant watching neighbors die as consequence of your actions. Marcel chose to fight. Jacques chose to fight. 37 executed resistance members chose to fight. Thousands of French civilians chose to resist despite knowing resistance meant risking execution. The collective choice was what made liberation possible. Allied military power provided capability. French resistance provided essential support. Together they drove out German occupation. The bakery basement where timing device was assembled still exists. Current owner uses it for normal bakery storage. Nothing marks location as historical site. No plaque indicates improvised explosives were built there. The space is ordinary commercial basement. Concrete floor, wooden shelves, flour sacks, routine equipment. Only Marcel's notebook in Paris Museum documents what happened in that space during occupation. The ordinariness was the point. Resistance succeeded by hiding extraordinary activity in ordinary commercial premises that German security couldn't monitor constantly. The memorial in Town Square lists Jacques Mercier's name, along with 36 others executed in reprisals. Visitors read names without knowing full stories. Jacques was baker who built timing device that failed prematurely. Marie was his wife, who had nothing to do with resistance, but was executed anyway. Jean was 17-year-old son. Sophie was 14-year-old daughter. 4 names on memorial. 1 family destroyed. Collective punishment for one person's resistance activity. Marcel survived to see those names carved in stone. He visited memorial regularly after its dedication. He never said what he thought while standing there reading Jacques' family names. But people who saw him there reported he stood silently for long periods, sometimes an hour or more, just standing and looking at the names. Whatever he thought remained private. Some burdens can't be shared. Some thoughts can't be expressed. Some debts can't be repaid. Only remembered. Burdens can't be shared. Some thoughts can't be expressed. Some debts can't be repaid. Only remembered.